Hello, everybody. Great to be with you. Michael Millerman here. I hope you're doing well this Wednesday morning. Today, I wanted to revisit a topic that we have looked at before on this channel, which is what should we make of online anonymity? What do we do about anons? In other words, are you for or against people preserving their privacy through anonymous online identities in order not to get fired, for example, by their employers for holding opinions that run against the current ideological orthodoxy? There's a long tradition in the history of political philosophy where anonymity or pseudonymity protects you from persecution to a certain extent. And the issue is back in the news again because Jordan Peterson, very popular, I'm sure you all know who Jordan Peterson is, Canadian psychologist, has been on the offensive once more against online anonymity. And Mark Granza of the online journal, actually, they have a print component now as well, IM 1776. They do great work. He just a day ago put out this article in defense of anons, and I thought that it would be nice for us to go through it, see where you stand on the issue of online anonymity. So let's take a look at what Mark Granza wrote. This is again in im1776.com, and it came out yesterday. Why Jordan Peterson is wrong to call for restrictions on anonymity. Should anons reveal themselves or be forced to reveal themselves? In response to Elon Musk tweeting on Sunday that Twitter will now protect anonymity, Canadian psychologist and YouTube megastar Jordan Peterson, among others, criticized the decision and claimed that online anonymity enables dark tetrad personality types. So here you see Peterson's tweet. If any of you follow Peterson online, you know he has this new tweet form where he's doing these kind of like formulated like a poem sort of. Anonymity enables the dark tetrad types, Elon Musk. And unopposed, they will take us all down. It's a big mistake, sir, with all due respect. Okay, there's Musk saying the platform will protect anons, and Peterson saying, don't do that. That's a mistake. And by the way, you see in the Musk tweet, he says this platform will protect anons for this reason particularly. You may be curious to know, well, what reason is he referring to? And it's actually helpful to see. Can I pull up the original post or not? No, for some reason I can't. But the reason is that it's so that people aren't fired, for example, by their employers, as I mentioned at the start of the stream. You know, if you work for, let's say, a very woke corporation or whatever the case is, or maybe you just, you know, maybe you have a political opinion that you'd like to share, but out of respect for the people that you work with or something, you don't necessarily want a contentious political issue associated with your name because you don't talk politics in the workplace. I don't know. There are many different reasons why you might want to have recourse to anonymity. But Peterson says that unopposed, anonymous online accounts will take us all down. So what's going on? This debate, of course, is nothing new, Mark Granza continues, nor is Peterson's critique. In October 2022, after Peterson experienced some not so pleasant replies by anonymous accounts on his YouTube interview with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, he tweeted, "I'm increasingly convinced that Twitter anonymity is the refuge of scoundrels and fiends. Say it and stand behind it or hold your tongue." And then proceeded to call for such accounts to be banned or at least restricted, referring to them on multiple occasions as manipulators and demons. Peterson is not alone in his antagonism toward the anons. Widely read post-liberal professor Patrick Deneen sparked a minor online controversy in February when he reacted negatively to Catholic outlet First Thing's decision to publish an article by Twitter anon account Lomez. Okay, so there's an online journal that you may know about. I mean, they also have a print component. They're called First Things. I published a piece there on Alexander Dugin's Heideggerianism. And First Things published this piece by a anonymous online Twitter account, Lomez. And Patrick Deneen wrote, "Disappointed doesn't quite capture my response to First Things publishing a Nietzsche light article by a Twitter anon. The justified opposition to wokeism, dominating the mainstream right, is in danger of descending into very dark places." Deneen tweeted, but declined to elaborate on what exactly within the article troubled him so much. Gatekeeping, Granza continues, is clearly what is at work here. And to be sure, gatekeeping is not necessarily bad, but there's also more to it than that. The first thing to keep in mind is that in most cases, online anonymity is not an accurate term. Anonymity means distributing information using a name that cannot be traced to any identifiable entity. In the almost 3 years since he writes, started IM 1776, we've run over 100 articles by so-called anons, but barely a handful of them were strictly speaking anonymous. What we've tended to publish is rather pseudonymous authors. Two of our editors, for instance, namely Benjamin Braddock and Lafayette Lee, are pseudonyms. But unlike actual anonymous accounts, both Ben and Lafayette have built consistent personas around such names over the years, with their social media and writing published in magazines and journals. They couldn't simply change pseudonyms and continue to publish in the same journals and or interact with the same people online without being identified. This is a form of accountability which compels similar incentives to act in a responsible and reliable way to someone writing under his own legal name. Screwing around in the way Peterson thinks these accounts are free to do applies only to actual anonymous accounts, which do exist but are far rarer than pseudonymous accounts and obviously less influential. The core question of Peterson's demand, however, goes deeper. The conception of anons as cowards, if not outright demonic forces, implies that real bravery means putting your face and name out there. And this is certainly partly true, but is that all there is to it? Consider the following scenario. If I, as the editor of a reasonably well-known publication, am attacked and canceled, a good number of people in the industry, friends and colleagues I made along the way, would be ready to defend me, which ultimately could have significant benefits. Although dealing with stalkers and harassers, both online and in real life, is unpleasant, being controversial can be profitable. It can increase one's profile, attract attention to a project, and open the door to various opportunities. In short, engaging with contentious issues in the culture war and online ecosystem can be rewarding. This fact is in part what drives a lot of people's willingness to speak up in the first place, and in some cases even entirely. This does not take away from any virtue that the act of speaking the truth entails. In many cases, the person could have chosen an easier or more lucrative career, but it shouldn't be exclusively portrayed as a self-sacrificing act. Okay, so the point he's making here, in other words, it's not just a courageous act to stand up and speak the truth. There can be an upside to it because you know you're going to attract attention to yourself. Some of that attention is going to be good attention, and some of that good attention, as it were, can be monetized. You'll have new connections, doors will open. Yes, some will close, but what's more interesting is which ones won't close. Which leads to the central point. What does the average person, that is someone with no significant online presence and or connections, have to gain from attracting rage groups such as Antifa as a consequence of speaking up? Not everyone has a book deal lined up, tens of thousands of followers ready to donate to their Patreon account, or some kind of similar career prospect awaiting post-cancellation, nor in most cases the skills or even interest in going down any of those paths. Right? So let me pause for a minute. You see that's the case. You know, if somebody's under the gun for their work on a controversial topic, but they have an audience of 10, 50, and 20,000 people, and they have a patronage network, and they have connections, and they can go publish in magazines that pay them, you know, hundreds or thousands of dollars an article or something like that. Okay, it's not so bad. But what if you have a position and you have nothing and nobody? At best, your quote-unquote average conservative, if canceled, might receive a couple of sympathetic headlines in conservative outlets and disappear from everyone's timeline 2 days later following the next minor controversy, and then be left alone to face the consequences. Right? You've probably heard stories like that. Somebody somewhere got canned for saying something. He's covered for a day. He or she is covered in the press for a day. And then what? Maybe the scars last a lifetime. This may include the loss of their jobs and the lasting effects going on for years, of being outcast and denounced by their peers, friends, and sometimes even their families. Not to mention death threats to contend with, along with stalking, extortion, and harassment. Some people on the online anonymous right might in fact have a shot at landing a book deal, although some of them have no interest in becoming celebrity figures. Their contribution to the discourse seems to be motivated mainly by an interest in ideas and culture. But people should, nevertheless, have the liberty to speak their minds while pursuing a career of their choosing outside political commentary. And from an ethical perspective, a gifted thinker or writer with the ambition to write for a living, who chooses to speak his or her mind, shouldn't be equated to a lawyer, doctor, or small business owner with no ambition to embark upon similar career paths. Okay, so it's important to give people the right to speak anonymously, especially if they have these careers that are unrelated to their political opinions somehow. And why should they have to risk their whole ordinary life just for the sake of speaking up about what they actually think about something, whatever it happens to be. Would our situation improve from more people speaking up? Surely, Mark Granza continues. It would be better if everyone would do it under their own name. Would it be better if everyone would do it under their own name and by putting their face out there? Probably, at least assuming they wouldn't censor themselves. But how many columnists do we really need? Wouldn't it be better to retain a conservative presence in compromised fields such as academia, medicine, law, tech, entertainment, or even the State Department and military, while facilitating the opportunity for these people to safely engage and contribute to the culture war by means of online commentary? The argument that everyone should post under his or her name if one cares enough to speak up only has standing if we can safely bet that the culture war could be won inside the time frame necessary for these people to re-enter their preferred fields without having sacrificed years or even decades of their lives and suffered such financial losses that could have bankrupted their families and led them to despair, or in extreme cases, even suicide. Let me just pause for a minute to recall here that I saw an article the other day. Okay, I didn't read it, so take this with a grain of salt. But that, well, let's put it this way. You yourselves have seen articles, no doubt, when you're on YouTube, when you're on Twitter, wherever you browse, of somebody who said, for example, a young woman who said, I don't want transgender women in my changing room because that's creepy and I don't feel safe. And sometimes those people get reprimanded because you're not allowed to say that. It's discriminatory. And you have other cases like that. So fine, you speak up and first you get punished for what you said. And then before you know it, you lose your job, you lose your connections, you lose your prospects. In some cases, you have financial losses that have bankrupted families and so on, or led to suicide. So can we safely assume that everybody who gets a chance to speak can speak freely, fairly, and without all of this blowback? Can we safely assume that? Do we feel confident enough to look someone in the eyes with a family and stable job and no desire or skills to become the next Jordan Peterson and tell them, speak up, we got your back, you'll be fine? You see, I'll interrupt the article for a minute again. People often point out that, look, Jordan Peterson, you sold tens of millions of copies of your book. Okay, you have people all over the world who have got your back. Okay, you're an extremely popular public figure. Maybe you'll have a hard time if you say something wrong. Maybe you'll have a lot of enemies coming for you because you're better known than the ordinary person is, but you're going to have more defenders for the exact same reason. But how can you expect somebody that nobody's ever heard of to have that kind of protection when the knives and the pitchforks are out for them? So I continue the article now. The right to post anonymously or pseudonymously online is a vital defense in fighting the current culture wars, and also an essential part of maintaining the internet as it was initially conceived. For this reason alone, it should be protected. That doesn't mean there aren't problems associated with it. Peterson is correct to point out that there are incentives to behave irresponsibly for someone who is protected by anonymity, and there's certainly no shortage of hateful and resentful types in such corners of the internet. But this side of the issue is also facilitated by the platforms and their algorithms, rather than just anonymity, and also caused by the current cultural and political climate, which demonizes and marginalizes young men with unwanted views and opinions, something that Peterson and people like him have partly contributed to. And by the way, I don't know whether we'll read it, but on this marginalizing, how exactly did he put it here? Demonizing and marginalizing young men with unwanted views and opinions. Look at this pretty ridiculous example. MSNBC, pandemic fitness trends have gone extreme, literally. White supremacists' latest scheme to valorize violence and hypermasculinity has gone digital. This article about, if you're a young man who's into physical fitness, including, if you are starting to do jiu-jitsu or boxing, well, guess what? Physical fitness has always been central to the far right, and Mein Kampf, Hitler fixated on boxing and jiu-jitsu. So if you're a young man who started to get interested in athleticism and martial arts training, big publications like MSNBC are pretty much already saying, that's a slippery slope. That's Mein Kampf and Hitler. He also liked boxing and jiu-jitsu. Everything young men are doing these days that isn't on the far left is being completely demonized, as Mark Granza points out, and you have some very conspicuous examples of that. So to repeat here, this side of the issue is also facilitated by the platforms and their algorithms, not just anonymity, and the current cultural and political climate, which demonizes and marginalizes young men with unwanted views and opinions, something that Peterson and people like him have partly contributed to. Let's just see, what does he have in mind with that? this other article, which you can look at later. Okay. As a man who has been repeatedly smeared and harassed by a combination of sociopathic journalists, deranged activists, and all sorts of left-wing lunatics, Peterson should know more than anyone that the phenomenon that most dangerously enables the dark tetrad in our modern times is outside the confines of right-wing Twitter and YouTube's comment sections. Dislike or disagree with them all you want, but in our current culture, institutions, governments, and online ecosystem, there are bigger demons to fry. Okay, so this was Mark Granza, the founding editor and publisher of I Am 1776. Full disclosure, I've also published with them before, and I like the work that they do there. This is his piece in defense of anons from a day ago against Jordan Peterson's claim that enabling anonymity enables the dark tetrad types, and unopposed, they will take us all down. Peterson telling Elon Musk that he's making a mistake protecting anons on Twitter. So that's the article that I wanted to go over with you. I hope you enjoyed that. You should definitely look at I Am 1776. They put out a lot of nice and good material. And then here is Peterson actually responding to that article. You see here, Mark Granza wrote, I wrote in defense of anonymity, responding to Peterson's claims that it's motivated solely by cowardice, and drew the important distinction between anonymous accounts and pseudonymous authors. And Jordan Peterson responded, I didn't say it was motivated solely by cowardice. There's spite, resentment, sadism, narcissism, Machiavellianism, bitterness, frustration, disappointment, projection, rationalization, self-righteousness, and the desire to shun responsibility, as well as cowardice, excepting the very rare true whistleblower, 1 in 1,000 at best. But you can see, we just read the article, and there are some points it makes that Peterson does not respond to here. Like, does it make sense in every case to put your job on the line? If you're going to say the kind of thing that might get you fired, is it really in all cases the right call to say that in your own name, to burn every bridge that you have? Is there never, maybe there's a responsibility in writing anonymously, not just the desire to shun responsibility. Maybe it can be an act of responsibility to write pseudonymously, to write anonymously. So there was that. And then here's another online figure here that you may have heard of or not. Martyrmade is his account. And he writes as follows. Peterson and his critics seem to be talking past each other on the issue of anonymity. He's arguing that anonymity fosters a culture of impunity that empowers and elevates the nastiest people, and that's true. His critics are pointing out that people need anonymity to protect themselves from serious professional, legal, and financial consequences for expressing sincerely held views, and that's true as well. In other words, Peterson is right that a lot of people who take advantage of anonymity do so to avoid responsibility for plainly antisocial behavior. But the critics are right that that is just something we have to accept as a side effect of the necessary right to anonymity in an increasingly totalitarian society. So that's a nice point. It makes you consider that, if properly stated, you can see on both sides exactly what the risks and rewards are, what the harms are, what the unintended consequences might be, and so on. So that's a nice post there. And this is going to be a topical issue because the more people are punished for holding views that are perpendicular to the orthodoxy, or, in other words, that don't line up exactly with what you're being forced to say these days, they sometimes want to take cover under anonymity. I will tell you that I assume most of you watching this, or many of you watching this, if it's not your first time on my channel, you know that I do work on the Russian political philosopher, ideologue, and activist Alexander Dugin. And I can tell you that when I was at the University of Toronto, in one case, I translated a book by Dugin called Last War of the World Island, Geopolitics of Contemporary Russia, Last War of the World Island, under a pseudonym. I translated it, but my name is not in the book because I was counseled at that time not to associate my name further with Dugin's name for all kinds of reasons. So even though I published several translations of Dugin's under my own name, that particular one was under a pseudonym. I actually regret, in my case, doing that. I wish that I did it in my own name. But at the time, it made sense to consider, well, are you going to burn every bridge that leads you to some sort of professional path forward? And in order to be cautious, I took the advice of publishing that translation under a pseudonym. So there you go. That's a little detail that might interest you. And then since we've gone through this, and you can say where you stand on this issue of anonymity to make it fun in the comments and in the chat. Is Peterson wrong to call for restrictions? Is Musk right to oppose restrictions and to protect anons? Is Martyrmade right that there's truth on both sides, but you have to be willing to take the good with the bad if you want to protect the right to anonymity in an increasingly totalitarian society? Would it be better if everybody just said what they thought in their own name? Is that feasible? Is that desirable? And I can tell you that a lot of accounts that I follow on Twitter and whose writing I enjoy, they're anons or they write under a pseudonym. Don't know who they are, wouldn't want to know who they are, have no need or desire, because what you're interested in is what they have to say, as long as they're not using it to just avoid responsibility. Okay, so while we're here, I haven't read this article. I only scrolled down to see that it suggested, in effect, if you're interested in jiu-jitsu, then you're just like Hitler. But why don't we look at it, because I think it could be interesting to to do. So this is MSNBC from a couple of days ago. Pandemic fitness trends have gone extreme, literally. White supremacists' latest scheme to valorize violence and hypermasculinity has gone digital. It appears, writes Cynthia Miller Idris, MSNBC columnist, the far right has taken advantage of pandemic at-home fitness trends to expand its decade-plus radicalization of physical mixed martial arts and combat sports spaces. Let me pause for a minute. Those of you, I assume some of you did have at-home fitness trends during the pandemic. Like, I had just started working out, embarrassing to say, but pretty much just started a regular gym routine as the pandemic hit. And I was pretty bummed out, to get the wind out of the sails and to have to, in fact, the gym where I was training closed down during the COVID shutdowns. They went out of business, which sucked. But, I bought some adjustable, dumbbells, some kettlebells and things like that, and worked out at home when all the gyms were closed. Well, little did I know, and little did you know, that the far right has taken advantage of pandemic at-home fitness trends to radicalize combat sports and mixed martial arts. Earlier this month, researchers reported that a network of online fascist fitness chat groups on the encrypted platform Telegram are recruiting and radicalizing young men with neo-Nazi and white supremacist extremist ideologies. Now, that could sound scary, by the way, and for all I know, maybe it is, but you should recognize, as some of you surely do, that what's been called neo-Nazi and white supremacist these days, well, you've seen articles that say wanting to show up to work on time is white supremacist extremism. But okay, initially lured with health tips and strategies for positive physical changes, new recruits are later invited to closed chat groups where far-right content is shared. Physical fitness has always been central to the far right. In Mein Kampf, Hitler fixated on boxing and jiu-jitsu, believing they could help him create an army of millions whose aggressive spirit and impeccably trained bodies, combined with fanatical love for the fatherland, would do more for the German nation than any mediocre tactical weapons training. Let me pause the article, because actually this theme, or this topic of the relationship between what you might call broadly gymnastic training of the body, martial arts training, military training, and so on, let's call that gymnastic, or if you prefer physical fitness, and its relationship to spiritedness, to patriotism, to courage, valor, and all of that. It's an old theme, older than Hitler's Mein Kampf. It's a theme that's discussed, for example, in this beauty that I've been teaching in private tutoring, the Laws of Plato. Not to mention other works of Plato's like the Republic, but here really, an amazing, amazing work. Maybe if it was a different day and I was feeling a little bit more up for it, we would take a 15-minute detour here. And I would tell you how at the start of Plato's Laws, a character called the Athenian stranger is talking to an old man from Sparta and an old man from Crete about the nature of their legal codes. And he asks, to what end has your legislator legislated? Like, for the sake of what do your laws exist? What do they look towards? Is it life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Is it freedom, order, and good government? What do your laws aspire to? And they say that their laws aspire to victory in war. And that for that reason, their legislator, in each case a god or a divine legislator, has laid down a law code that has trained them in gymnastics and physical exercises. Okay, let me actually just read you that, because I think we're going to take this MSNBC article and just graft onto it a little bit of Plato. since, I teach Plato at millermanschool.com, and it's important to me that you know that all the important things we talk about have been talked about at a serious level by Plato. So it's amazing. Again, this character Athenian stranger is talking, and one of the guys he's talking to, he says about his lawgiver that he set everything up with a view to war. Okay, the common meals, he set them up after seeing that all men, when on a military campaign, are compelled by their business to eat together during this time in order to keep up their guard. So in Sparta and in Crete, there are these common meals, okay, because it's preparing people for what it's like to be on a military campaign. And he also had them run on uneven terrain, suffering the cold and walking around with all their weapons heavily for a long time, like basically preparing for war all the time. And eventually, Plato's character, the Athenian stranger, he gets us to see that there's more to virtue than military valor. There's more to virtue than courage. And that if a legislator was truly divine, he wouldn't have made a divine code of law just for the sake of a part of virtue, for courage, but he would also have practices and customs designed to make the citizenry more moderate, more just, and more wise, ultimately. So an amazing work, Plato's Laws, but it shows you that these themes, they go back to the origins of the history of political philosophy and to the nature of political affairs. But I thought this was pretty ridiculous when I browsed it. If you're interested in boxing and jiu-jitsu, you might as well be Hitler. That's not what this says, but still, it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy to invoke Hitler so soon in an article about how fitness trends during the pandemic have been co-opted by quote-unquote white nationalists and neo-Nazis. But okay, let's go on in this article. In more modern times, far-right groups have launched mixed martial arts and boxing gyms in Ukraine, Canada, and France, among other places, focused on training far-right nationalists in violent hand-to-hand combat and street fighting techniques. So I wouldn't be surprised if some cases that's true. The problem I would say is when everything gets called far-right, that's when you become suspicious of these kinds of claims. Could there be violent nationalistic training camps? Well, I don't know. Yeah, probably I'm sure that there are. And can they be completely over the top in every ideologically zealous, radical, and extremist sort of way, even running against the basic laws and things like that? Yeah, maybe, but again, when showing up to work on time is called white nationalist far-right behavior, then you have to sort of dig into the details. It's caught the attention of intelligence authorities, especially in Europe, where various reports have noted the role of combat sports and MMA, mixed martial arts, in radicalizing and promoting far-right violence. A series of collaborative efforts between governments, national sports associations, and local gyms in places such as Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom have introduced intervention and prevention programs. The US is comparatively far behind, which will only become more and more problematic, especially since the phenomenon is growing in the country, building on the established fight club culture of MMA far-right extremists. So I should say, guys, that one of the reasons why this article piqued my interest, again, I haven't actually read it, just the title and the first few paragraphs piqued my interest. We're reading it together now. Is because, as I've mentioned before, recently on this channel, I started doing jiu-jitsu recently in a way that, for me anyways, I would say had very little to do with training far-right nationalism and this, that, and the other thing. And it had more to do with, first of all, never having done a combat sport, wanting to work on my fitness, not wanting to be completely unschooled when it comes to basic issues of self-defense. But actually, I've taken to jiu-jitsu quite a bit. I've come to respect the practitioners and the sport and learning about its history. And I'll be going there later today if my old man body doesn't fall apart before the start of class. So I became a little bit defensive when I saw this suggestion that, fitness, the immediate linking of fitness to, the threat of white nationalism or the threat of neo-Nazism, that I don't like. And you've seen other examples of that kind of quote unquote journalism or of that kind of thing, that the fitter you become, the more to the right you go, and that the left is all about ugliness and being fat and stuff like that. So, you make your own sense of this, okay? You don't want to downplay the phenomenon to the extent to which it's real, but you also don't want to blow it out into comical disproportion. All right, it's caught the attention of intelligence authorities, especially in Europe, where various reports have noted the role of combat sports and MMA in radicalizing and promoting far-right violence. A series of collaborative efforts have introduced intervention programs. Okay, we read that. The US is comparatively far behind. We read that, but the phenomenon is growing in the country. The leader of a Maryland skinhead group, for example, once ran a gym to recruit and train white supremacists in mixed martial arts. Four members or associates of the racist Violent Rise Above movement, the self-described premier MMA club of the alt-right, pled guilty to conspiracy to riot after the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. An online propagandist for that now defunct group was spotted among protesters on January 6th last year. So again, like, okay, there was an MMA club that saw itself as on the alt-right and that pled guilty to this conspiracy, and then one of its online propagandists was spotted at the protest. Okay, all right. When members of the white supremacist group Patriot Front marched in Washington, D.C. in December 2021, they were accompanied by a new media outlet created by Rams founder Robert Rundo, who's working to create a network of far-right MMA active clubs in the U.S. and abroad. The intersection of extremism and fitness leans into a shared obsession with the male body, training, masculinity, testosterone, strength, and competition. This is interesting because you do see, okay, this is worth thinking about, although I would say, again, however the extremism does factor or not into the account, you do see on the right, I would say, at least, generally speaking, the online Twitter right, for example, which is where we're drawing most of these opinions from, a concern with or an interest in fitness, and that means also training, strength, competition, and testosterone, because as I understand, that's got something to do with your strength, with your recovery time, with your training ability, and so on, with your aggression. And so you can sort of, there are various reasons. It's interesting because as I started, 7-8 months ago, I've started talking to students of mine, and I never had an interest before in mixed martial arts. I didn't know anything about it. Okay. I didn't listen to any of the popular podcast shows that discuss it. Didn't know the different styles, just had zero interest in it. But now, having started to do one such sport, jiu-jitsu, I find that some of the people that I talk to, like I just talked to John Vallis on the Rapid Fire podcast. He's a Bitcoin guy, but we talked about philosophy and theology. And at the end, he told me that he trains jiu-jitsu. And, as soon as you start talking with people who train, you start looking into strength and conditioning. How often do you go to the gym? How are you recovering? How's your diet? And so on, because to do a combat sport, you have to be fit. So these things do hang together in a way. And also a concern with fitness as a kind of cultural opposition to the view that you can be a fat, lazy slob and celebrate your fat, lazy, slovenly self as authentic. So there is an important culture war component to thinking about physicality, fitness, and all of that. I wonder what you guys think about that, but I think that's undeniable. Separately from the issue of extremism, separately from that issue. Physical fitness training, which isn't to say this is unimportant, but I'm just isolating or distinguishing the two. Physical fitness training, especially in combat sports, appeals to the far right. Always poorly defined, but okay, for many reasons. Fighters are trained to accept significant physical pain. That's true, isn't it? To be warriors. That's true as well, isn't it? Right? Your ability to endure pain, you're feeling like you're a warrior, and to embrace messaging around solidarity, heroism, and brotherhood. I think that's also true enough as far as it goes that would be a component in combat sports. There is a sense of camaraderie. There is a sense of overcoming, including self-overcoming, overcoming your own limitations. Having to deal with physical pain. I tell you, as someone who's been doing it for just a little while, that's real. And the feeling that you're some sort of warrior, or that you in principle could be a defender of yourself, of your family, of your people, of your country. You have to admit that would come with the territory to some extent. Maybe for some people even would be the primary concern. It's championed as a tool to help fight the coming race war. Now, that I don't know about, okay? And the street battles that will precede it. Although you could see, if you did think there was going to be a coming race war, if you did think you're about to have a zombie apocalypse or whatever, then for sure, I guess you'd want to be ready to go when that happens. Recruits are encouraged to link individual moral virtues such as willpower, decisiveness, and courage with desired collective traits such as virility and manliness. All by itself, I would say that's not so bad, is it? I mean, if you're a man getting into a combat sport and you know that you have courage, decisiveness, willpower on an individual level that you're working on, you might want to see those as desired collective traits. Okay, this is interesting. I'm glad we're going through this. This also works in reverse, with white supremacists encouraging potential recruits or activists to stay in good physical shape as a way of managing self-presentation to the public. Again, you could also see that as a kind of pretty typical public relations type thing, right? You're going to wear a suit. You might as well also have some biceps or whatever. The neo-Nazi blogger Andrew Anglin advised his followers that quote-unquote fat people should be required to commit to losing weight if they are to stay involved with groups or in-person gatherings, noting that continued obesity should not be tolerated. Probably nothing wrong with committing to getting fitter, but if it happens to come from a controversial figure, then MSNBC will make of that what they will. With recruitment now moving from physical gyms to chat rooms, live streamed fights, tournaments, festivals, and even combat sports video games. Oh, by the way, they probably think, and therefore Donald Trump walking into the the UFC and shaking hands with Dana White and smiling and chatting with Joe Rogan, that's a sign of things to come. That must be, well, okay. With recruitment now moving from physical gyms to chat rooms, live streamed fights, tournaments, festivals, and even extreme sports, combat sports video games, we're seeing an extremist fighting culture being combined with an entertainment culture that already valorizes violence and hypermasculinity. What would you say is hypermasculinity? You see, that's even a word like that, would require you to stop and think a little bit. Fitness, of course, is a staple and a hobby for many people for whom it is enjoyable and rewarding for brain health and overall well-being. So, you have to give credit where it's due. The author is obviously acknowledging that not everybody who lifts weights is a Nazi, which is good. That was the way that this article was skewered online, including, I contributed to that in my own way, right? By pointing out that, this is suggesting that everyone who does jiu-jitsu is just like Hitler. No, that's obviously not the main claim here. Fitness, of course, is a staple and hobby for many people for whom it is enjoyable and rewarding for brain health and overall well-being. Physical fitness channels dopamine, adrenaline, and serotonin in ways that literally feel good. Intertwining those feelings with hateful and dehumanizing ideas, see, this we'll have to discuss, while promoting the concept that physical warriors are needed to create the strength and dominance to defend one's people from a perceived enemy, makes for a dangerous and powerful cocktail of radicalization. But look, how do you defend your people? First of all, do not people have enemies? Are those enemies not more than perceived? And in order to defend against them, don't you need to have warriors with strength? I mean, that's so elementary that's literally like the first 10 pages of Plato's Republic, the first 10 pages of Plato's Laws. There's a reason why courage, political courage, is always discussed in the context of the history of political philosophy, or at least in its classical form, because if you're going to have a political community, it's going to need to defend itself. And you actually cannot have fat, lazy slobs defending you from enemies, unless maybe you have it through the mediation of technology. Because you can have a fat, lazy slob controlling a joystick of a drone that drops bombs on your enemy, in which case maybe there's a decoupling from what's required physically in order to defend. But, if you're thinking about this issue, health, fitness, physicality, the virtues of courage, will, and all the rest of those things that were discussed earlier in the article, you can't isolate it from a basic analysis of what's necessary in all political communities. And by the way, the enemy, like Carl Schmitt taught us in the concept of the political, the enemy doesn't need to be dehumanized. And in fact, if you remember Schmitt's argument, he says it's liberals who tended to dehumanize their enemy. How? By saying that if you're with the liberals, you're on the side of humanity. Meaning that if you're not a liberal and you're not with us, then you're not even human. You're subhuman. You're dehumanized. Whereas Schmitt says that the concept of the enemy doesn't mean that your enemy is evil, doesn't mean that your enemy is not even human. It just means that he's your enemy. He can be beautiful, he can be smart, but he's your enemy. So I would say packed into this little paragraph here is a dissertation or a book's worth of material to think about the relationship between gymnastic training, political virtue, liberalism and anti-liberalism. Okay. For those of us working to find better pathways to reach at-risk youth, the article continues, understanding the ways that far-right groups recruit and socialize youth in ways that go well beyond rhetoric and ideas is crucial. It's critical that leaders, including parents, physical trainers, gym owners, coaches, and others in the fitness world, understand how online grooming and recruitment can intersect with spaces that we generally think of promoting health and well-being. That seems fair enough. I mean, you can't imagine you go to a gym, or you sent your friend to a gym, or whatever, a family member's child goes to a gym, and you think like, this is going to be great for their health and well-being, and then before you know it, they come out of there and they like, whatever, hate all black people or hate all white people or whatever the case is, you know? That obviously would not be the primary goal of the training if you think about it in terms of promoting health and well-being. So that would suck, I would say. The realm of online fitness now provides a new and ever expanding market for reaching and radicalizing young men, and it requires our targeted focus and resources to try to stop the cycle. Cynthia Miller Idris is an author and expert on extremism. So, you know, this article says some things. This is the MSNBC article, Pandemic Fitness Trends Have Gone Extreme, literally, which maybe is like a genuinely interesting sociological fact. You know, if people are being radicalized, let's say in MMA gyms or whatever else the case is, or in these online fascist fitness groups on Telegram. But the difficulty is you definitely have to draw many fine lines, you know, because what if somebody's a fit conservative who thinks that it's important to be fit for ordinary patriotic causes, who just wants to be strong because he does think that the country has enemies, maybe even internal enemies. You know, as I mentioned, when articles saying that, you know, an interest in classical philosophy and showing up to work on time are signs of neo-Nazism and white supremacism, you have to be careful, but that's not to deny that there are ridiculous, zealous, ideological hotheads who literally do think that all X need to be killed or annihilated, and all that kind of thing. So I don't mean to deny the existence of extremist ideologies, but it's kind of a fine line to have to walk when you're thinking about the relationship of fitness, courage, valor, self-defense, national defense, and all of that. Okay, so feel free to share your thoughts on what we've covered, what we've been reading and discussing. I'm sorry that I didn't throw the chat on here for everybody to see too much, but here it is. Richard Simmons, far-right extremist. That's funny. Jane Fonda, far-right extremist. The Beachbody workout DVDs. Don't know about that. I think when I was a kid, we had what's that person's name? She had a famous workout video. She's a model with a famous workout video. And one of the reasons it was famous was because the soundtrack was by this band called Primal Scream, which was a weird thing for a workout video, because Primal Scream is like, that was a pretty great album. It was weird to see it on a workout video. You know what I mean? What's her name? Starts with a C, Cynthia something. I don't know. If you know, you can say so. That's the only fitness video that I'm aware of from the good old days of VHS. Okay, other things here about wrestling. USSR was famous for their wrestling program. How is fitness inherently right-wing? Maybe the idea is that it's not inherently right-wing, but it's being exploited now more on the right than on the left. Like you don't have, I don't know, Stalinists infiltrating MMA gyms and trying to get people. If you've ever seen videos of Antifa rioting, it's almost self-explanatory that they're not paying a lot of attention to their fitness, just working on their Molotov cocktails or whatever. Okay. Anyway, I appreciate you guys being here. I hope that you enjoyed the articles. We had one on anonymity, Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, Mark Granza, and the debate over whether anonymity has a place online, and if so, what place, how to distinguish it from pseudonymity, and, you know, people being able to protect their livelihood. If you want to get fired for having the wrong opinion, have nowhere to go, nowhere to fall back on if you're not Jordan Peterson with an army of supporters. What do you do in those cases? So that's pretty important. And then this article from MSNBC, just to show you, we don't only read here from right-wing sources, okay? We went over an article from MSNBC about fitness and fascism. And yeah, this was what I was referring to earlier, Trump's huge applause at the recent UFC event, which had a heavily Hispanic crowd, 2 Mexicans in title fights. I guess that's a nice point there too. But as you know, you don't have to be white to be a white supremacist. Have you guys seen that article headline recently? So even Mexicans can be white supremacists. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. I do want to strongly encourage you to go to millermanschool.com, where I have a free 30-day introduction to philosophy. I have all kinds of great courses on some thinkers who are important to understand the right. Heidegger, Dugin, Schmidt, Strauss. But I don't teach them primarily because of their importance to the right, but because they're serious thinkers raising foundational questions in a thoughtful way that we can all learn from, whether you're on the right or on the left or a liberal or wherever you find yourself on the political spectrum. There's always an opportunity to learn from serious thinkers, because one of the things that makes them serious is that they go deeper than our typical culture war divisions. Like I showed you with Plato's Laws, a great example. We can't call, some people call Plato a proto-communist because in the Republic, there are some ideas discussed there about communism of wives and children and property. So everybody has their, on one hand, you have private property, and on the other hand, you have the guardian class, which has no property, no home, no privacy, no wife of their own, no family of their own, no kids of their own. Everything's held in common. Therefore, Plato is a proto-communist. But then you have other passages, Philosopher King, the guardian class, things that I mentioned to you here from the Laws, and Plato's taught as a proto-fascist. It's because you can't use these categories, fascist, totalitarian, communist, and so on, when you're thinking about somebody as serious as Plato. What he's giving us is an account of the nature of political life in a way that takes some work to grasp and to think about, to assess, and to compare with other accounts like Aristotle's or more modern accounts, for example, like Machiavelli's or Hobbes's. And by the way, I just have to tell you this because ultimately I do these live streams, yes, because I want to spend time with you and grow the channel and go over these articles and read them, not just by myself, but together with you. But I also always want to encourage those of you who haven't, not only to go to the school. Of course, it's a business and it's nice for me when you buy courses, but if at the end of my life I die and I go to heaven or to hell and I see that 10 or 20 or 30 of you read Plato who weren't going to read him before, or you read some other great book that you weren't going to read before because you heard me mention it on this channel, then my soul would be a little bit more at rest than otherwise. So about Hobbes, you probably have heard Thomas Hobbes, this famous phrase of his about the state of nature and the war of all against all and life being poor, nasty, brutish, solitary, and short and all of that. Does that ring a bell? The state of nature, war of all against all. Okay, hopefully that rings a bell. Well, in Plato's Laws, amazingly, and I'm talking about here literally the first 2-3 pages. In fact, the second page, okay? Actually, the second page. The character that, so there I mentioned, there are 3 characters who are talking. The Athenian stranger, and an old Spartan and an old Cretan. I'm not going to give you all the details, okay? But the Athenian asks them, who do you say gave you your laws, a god or a man? They say, a god. And then he says, to what end did your divine lawgiver legislate? As I mentioned, was it for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, freedom, order, and good government, or what? And they say, for the sake of victory in war. Remember, we discussed that earlier. And now listen. This is kind of amazing. Page 2 of the Laws. The character is speaking, and he says about his lawgiver who legislated for the sake of victory in war, he says, I believe he condemned the mindlessness of the many who do not realize that for everyone throughout the whole of life, an endless war exists against all cities. So all cities are at war with one another always throughout life. The war of all against all. And then the Athenian stranger says to him, is it only cities that are at war with one another? Or is it also neighborhoods? Are neighborhoods also always at war with one another? The guy says, yeah. What about households? Are households always at war with one another? Yeah. And what about individuals? Are individuals always at war with themselves? Like an internal war? And he says, yes. Okay. And then the guy that the Athenian stranger is talking to says, right here, stranger, is the first and best of all victories. The victory of oneself over oneself, and being defeated by oneself is the most shameful and at the same time the most worst of all defeats. These things indicate that there's a war going on in us, ourselves against ourselves. So I'm going to spare you the amazing continuation of the article or of the argument. But look, you have Hobbes saying there's a war of all against all, and you have Plato in the Laws on page 2 putting in the mouth of one of his characters that there's a constant state of war of all against all. Okay, that's an amazing thing, truly an amazing thing. Well, anyway, before we end the stream, I just have to tell you the name of that workout video. Workout video, Primal Scream. Cindy Crawford. There we go. Cindy Crawford. Does that sound familiar? Wait. Here we go. Yeah, you guys know Primal Scream? Can you hear this? Let me just do it for fun. Yeah, you can probably hear this, although it must be way too loud. Is that better? So, this is a band called Primal Scream, and this is the workout video. Cyndi Lauper. Oh, no, not Cyndi Lauper. Cindy Crawford. So, there you go. MillermanSchool.com. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, share, subscribe. Buy a course if you're in the market for a course. And I'll see you on the next live stream. We'll just play this out for a little bit.